Was he a criminal beyond redemption? Had he spoiled the life of the sweet woman out there in her berth, or could he somehow make amends for what he had done? And was he as badly to blame for it all as he felt himself to be? After a minute he rallied, to realize that his face was dirty. He washed the marks of the adhesive plaster away, and then, not satisfied with the result, he brought his shaving things from his suitcase and shaved. Somehow he felt more like himself after his toilet was completed, and he slipped back into the darkened drawing room and stretched himself wearily on the couch, which, according to his directions, was not made up, but merely furnished with pillows and a blanket. The night settled into the noisy quiet of an express train, and each revolution of the wheels as they whirled their way Chicago-ward resolved itself into the old refrain: "Don't let anything hinder you. Don't let anything hinder you." He certainly was not taking the most direct route from New York to Washington, though it might eventually prove that the longest way round was the shortest way home, on account of its comparative safety. As he settled to the quiet of his couch, a number of things came more clearly to his vision. One was that they had safely passed the outskirts of New York without interference of any kind, and must by this time be speeding toward Albany, unless they were on a road that took them more directly west. He had not thought to look at the tickets for knowledge of his bearings, and the light was too dim for him to make out any monograms or letterings on inlaid wood panels or transoms, even if he had known enough about New York railroads to gain information from them. There was one thing certain. Even if he had been mistaken about his supposed pursuers, by morning there would surely be someone searching for him. The duped Holman combination would stop at nothing when they discovered his theft of the paper, and he could not hope that so sharp-eyed a man as Mr. Holman had seemed to be would be long in discovering the absence of his private mark on the paper. Undoubtedly he knew it already. As for the frantic bridegroom, Gordon dreaded the thought of meeting him. It must be put off at any hazards until the message was safe with his chief. Then, if he had to answer with his life for carrying off another man's bride, he could at least feel that he had left no duty to his government undone. It was plain that his present situation was a dangerous one from two points of view, for the bridegroom would have no difficulty in finding out what train he and the lady had taken, and he was satisfied that an emissary of Holman had more than a suspicion of his identity. The obvious thing to do was to get off that train at the first opportunity and get across country to another line of railroad. But how was that to be done with a sick lady on his hands? Of course he could leave her to herself. She probably had taken journeys before and would know how to get back. She would at least be able to telegraph to her friends to come for her. He could leave her money and a note explaining his involuntary villainy, and her indignation with him would probably be a sufficient stimulant to keep her from dying of chagrin at her plight. But as from the first, every nerve and fibre in him rejected this suggestion. It would be cowardly, unmanly, horrible. Undoubtedly it might be the wise thing to do from many standpoints, but never! He could no more leave her that way than he could run off to save his life and leave that message he carried. She was a trust as much as that. He had got into this, and he must get out somehow, but he would not desert the lady or neglect his duty. Toward morning, when his fitful vigil became less lucid, it occurred to him that he ought really to have deserted the bride while she was still unconscious, jumping off the train at the short stop they had made soon after she fell into his arms. She would then have been cared for by someone, his absence discovered, and she would have been put off the train and her friends sent for at once. But it would have been dastardly to have deserted her that way, not knowing even if she still lived, he on whom she had at least a claim of temporary protection. It was all a terrible muddle, right and wrong juggled in such a mysterious and unusual way. He never remembered to have come to a spot before where it was difficult to know which of two things it was right to do. There had always before been such clearly defined divisions. He had supposed that people who professed not to know what was right were people who wished to be blinded on the subject because they wished to do wrong and think it right. But now he saw that he had judged such too harshly. Perhaps his brain had been overstrained with the excitement and annoyances of the day, and he was not quite in a condition to judge what was right. He ought to snatch a few minutes' sleep, and then his mind would be clearer, for something must be done, and that soon. It would not do to risk entering a large city where detectives and officers with full particulars might even now be on the watch for him. He was too familiar with the workings of retribution in this progressive age not to know his danger. But he really must get some sleep. At last he yielded to the drowsiness that was stealing over him. Just for a moment, he thought, and the wheels hummed on their monotonous song. Don't let anything hinder. Don't let anything. Don't let. Don't hinder. End of chapter 7.